Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplanty Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me. Yeah, it's pretty much tropical houseplants. Now, for all the people that have been around for a long while, they might have seen a video about this plant previously, but for all the newbies, this is a new one possibly that you might have not have seen. Let me just pick it up really quickly. This is my amazing hibiscus, and you might be able to tell the telltale bloom on the side there, and I can't remember exactly which hybrid this is because you will get a lot of hybrids of this plant. Let me just bring it up so you can see the full height of it. Not a particularly tall plant for something that's been around for 3 years, but I know from seeing other videos on this plant, and I have purposely kept it in smaller pots because I know that if you leave this and it's happy, it can grow into kind of like almost like a bit of a small tree, and I truly don't have the space for any more large plants in my collection. So I am trying to keep it relatively small. Currently, this specific hibiscus has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's it for now. 6, maybe a 7th there. There's about 7 buds that are waiting to come out. Now, since moving to this newer location, I have to say that this plant has been a lot happier. Normally, I'd be lucky if I get, in the summer, in the growing season, if I get 1 to 2 blooms every couple of weeks, basically. But there's been times where this plant, and there's usually only 1 or 2 maximum blooms at one time on this plant. And it's a shame I didn't film this video a couple of days ago because there was 4 blooms on this at the same time, and it was quite spectacular. Now, the one thing I will say about this plant, and I don't know whether or not it's just in my care, I haven't really talked to a lot of other people that have got this indoors. I know that people do grow hibiscus indoors. I have actually found that the flowers, at least here indoors, last about a day or 2, basically. That's realistically what it is. The bloom will start kind of budding up and taking color a couple of days before it blooms, and then it will bloom for a day or 2, as I said, and then it will kind of essentially close up and then drop off. The whole process probably takes about 5 to 7 days, essentially from when the bud starts to color up to opening up to closing down and then dropping, essentially. And you might be able to see, let me see if I've got any that are currently vacant. There we go. There is one there, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you might be able to see the spent bloom has dropped out. But what was originally holding the bloom, I don't actually know technically what the biological term is for that. If I do find it, I'll put it up the top here. But that does stay on for a couple more days and then it drops off. And then you might be able to see if I turn this around, obviously, you know me and my janky support sticks. There is obviously a janky support stick. And this is really, really jankily kind of like put together because there is one kind of plant tie that's tying up to the support pole and then the rest of it on the trunks of each one of these stems, essentially. And they are quite woody. After a while, they do turn quite woody. When they first come in, they are very green and very soft. But there is 1, 2, 3, 4 stems in here. And based on something that I have seen on an awesome podcast, and hopefully you are already listening to the Plant Daddy podcast. If not, do check out Matthew and Stephen. They're fantastic, and their knowledge is bar none. And I have actually spoken to the guys a few times, and it's nice to talk to other kind of planty geeks, essentially, and we may geek out a bit on occasion. But the thing with these plants, and this is something I do want to try after something I think that either Matthew or Stephen said, is that if you chop it up and you chop it up in the right place where there is maybe another growth point coming out, and I'm trying to find, you might be able to see maybe right there that there's another growth point that's ready to come in. If I was to chop it off there, it would basically branch out into 2 separate plants. And I can't remember now if this is a plant that you can actually root from a cutting that you will take like that. I would imagine if there are nodes, and there are nodes on this, that potentially you could root it out. I am considering doing some cuttings on this plant just to help it bush out and get wider still rather than taller after the growing season, and kind of hope that it will do that in preparation for the next growing season. Let me just put this down because it's getting a bit heavy. But I do want to take some cuttings there from the top, and I might try propagating them with some rooting hormone, and I'll probably try rooting that in a light, airy, aroid soil mix. There's a lot of people that are coming back to the notion of sometimes actually propagating plants directly into soil is faster, more efficient, like faster, which is more efficient essentially, and just more effective a lot of the times. I haven't tried it too much yet with my plants because I am moving most of my plants slowly over, the ones that I can, into pon. And I will be doing a separate video probably this week actually that will come out maybe after this one or before this one, depending on how I edit, where I will talk about certain plants that I have propagated straight from cutting and then just essentially put it straight into lechuza pon with a water reservoir and results that I've had off the back of that. But I know that there's a big movement to move back into the more traditional way of propagating, and actually a lot of the ways that some plant nurseries are propagating, or I think probably most plant nurseries are propagating, where they just take a cutting with a node, shove it in some light soil, airy soil essentially, and let it do its thing essentially. It will root out the same way that it would in any other media, and the plant that is naturally growing in some form of soil or media, especially on the forest floor, they will quite readily root out into that soil, and the roots that come out are essentially soil roots, so there's no need to then transplant them into soil. They're already in soil, so they don't have to move it around too much. It's generally less stressful for the plants, and from kind of comments that I'm seeing starting to crop up online, which again makes sense, it's a much more effective way of propagating, which would kind of make sense if you think about it. Most of these plants, the way that they would propagate naturally in nature is if, say, something kind of chopped off part of a stem essentially and it dropped onto the ground, it would root into the ground where it fell. That's the whole point of them being able to put out initially what might be aerial roots that will turn into soil roots from those nodes, because essentially they want to make sure that they survive and they pass on that genetic material, even though technically, and I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, when you take a cutting and you root that cutting, essentially what you're creating is a genetic clone of that plant. If you want to create propagation that might have slightly different genetics, and a lot of plants, there's interesting videos, do check them out on YouTube about this. Vegetables and fruits tend to do this a lot. If you were actually to then pollinate, for instance, the flower of this hibiscus, and you were to take it to seed, and you then planted those seeds, there is a potential that that seed would have different genetic material, especially if you're doing cross-pollination. If you've got two separate, maybe cultivars of the hibiscus, and you were to cross-pollinate, the seed that would then occur from that would carry the genetics from both of the parents. If you are pollinating with the same genetics from the same plant, it's a different story. But yeah, really interesting topic. I did fall down a YouTube hole when I discovered that some plants do this. I think ones that come to mind, and do correct me if any of you know anything different about this, I think potatoes are one of them, that a tuber from a potato plant, if you were to plant it out, will produce the same potato plant. But if you were to pollinate the blooms of that potato plant, whatever is then created from that bloom and the seed is genetically different from the original potato. So if you want, for instance, to grow King Edward's potatoes, you would get a tuber of a King Edward potato and grow it from there, rather than seeds from a King Edward potato, because the seeds from a King Edward potato won't necessarily create another King Edward's potato. Hopefully this is making sense. And I know there's a few other plants that are very similar. I think tomatoes is the same. I think, if I'm not mistaken, a nut that's similar. I think it's a nut. I'm too sure it's not a fruit. It might be one of those weird ones. Pecans or pecans are similar as well. So there's some interesting things genetically on how plants are geared towards survival, essentially. So if you think about it, if you were to grow this hypothetical potato plant from a King Edward's potato, and you were to take seeds from all the different blooms, potentially you could have different varieties of potatoes from every different bloom. So something interesting to bear in mind. But coming back to the hibiscus, I went on a bit of a tangent again, sorry. In terms of its care, the thing that has worked for me, because I know that some people might struggle a bit to grow these indoors, the biggest tips I can give that have worked for me time and time again is this gets as much light as most of my cactuses. So this is in a bright south-facing window and it gets baked by the sun all day long. The soil, I will always check with, let me see if I can find one. Moisture meter, it will be your friend. Purchase one if you haven't already. I've got some links down in the description. But definitely check that the soil is dry all the way through before you water it. Granted, in the summer when you're wanting a bit more bloom, just make sure that you're not letting it go fully dry, kind of Sahara desert dry before you rewater. Maybe leave it until it's just between moist and dry and then water it again. But definitely in the winter, you want to let it fully dry out because this can also get root rot relatively easily. I've never lost any. This is the same plant that I got. And I've repotted it a couple of times. The roots are substantial, by the way, every time I repot it. I do keep it in a plastic pot because I do want to keep some more of that moisture in there. I don't want it to dissipate quite so quickly. To give you an idea, I will drench this plant in the summer every 2 to 3 days when it's really hot. It gets watered that frequently. In the winter, that might turn into once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. So it gives you a big indication of how much the water need fluctuates throughout the seasons. The other big thing if you do want blooms is get yourself a good fertilizer. I swear by liquid gold leaf for everything in my plant collection. I tried with some of these bloom heavy plants that you might buy specifically for the blooms rather than the foliage, like this one for instance. Although at least in Europe, or at least here locally, I can talk because I've seen this, there are some plant shops now that are getting a variegated version of the hibiscus, and I have bought one. It grows interestingly. There's a lot of white variegation and it's splotchy, and that one will get red blooms eventually. I've not got my one to bloom. However, I have had it holidaying outside in the summer, and that one's another one that I'm going to take some cuttings and try to propagate and see what's going to happen essentially with that one. But for things like this that have got blooms, I did try to do bloom fertilizers, ones that are boosting, and I think it's not nitrogen, I think it's phosphorus. It needs to have a higher phosphorus in order for it to bloom. And yes, it did kind of work a bit with this, but then I found that ironically enough with most of my blooming plants, the same with Hoya, if I've just got them on a regular feed with liquid gold leaf, those blooms happen more frequently and they last for a lot longer, bizarrely enough. But yeah, if you're in the UK and you haven't tried liquid gold leaf, I've said it again and I will say it again, do give it a try. If you're abroad, I know that you can do bigger group orders and just ship to you and your friends and you can all kind of see the benefits from it. I'm assuming in the States and other places you might have some great fertilizers as well, but this is what we have here essentially. And I think that's pretty much it. Other than that, it's not a particularly fussy plant. It's always been in the living room. It's always had household humidity. Nothing special. It's actually a lot of the time it's been by a window directly above a radiator and it's been fine. Yes, maybe sometimes in the summer just keep an eye out for spider mites. That's the one thing I found that it's kind of a bit more susceptible to. But to be fair, I don't even treat this heavily. I take it outside in the summer, give it a good hose down, spray the spider mites off the leaves. Do that in 2 weeks' time as well, just in case there's any left there. And generally, it just keeps on trucking on. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say today about the hibiscus. I have waffled on for too long, and apologies for the tangents. Hopefully you've enjoyed though. So yeah, if you do have any questions, comments, do drop them down below. Love to have that conversation with you as always. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.